Hello and welcome to HopefulHomemaker.com. Today we are going to be learning how to make half rectangle triangles. Now this block that we're working on, I should have said this at the beginning, is a 3.5 by 6.5 inch half rectangle triangle. That means it will finish at 3 inches by 6 inches. For right-handed people, this is how I would mark my ruler to trim half rectangle triangles. I'm using a ruler that is 12 by 6. So it's easy to manage, easy to rotate, but what I'm doing is I created a window in my ruler that is 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. I did this just by taking a roll of washi tape, and first I taped off across the entire ruler at this point, so the top edge of the tape sits right on the 6.5 inch line across the entire ruler. If I was right-handed, I would want to be able to trim two sides of the blocks at a time, here and here. And so I blocked off the top right side of that ruler. So I came in from the right side 3.5 inches and put another piece of tape down. So I've created a window. Now when we trim our blocks, we are going to disregard all of these angles here. And there's only one thing we're really going to pay attention to, and you will see that I have already marked it. I took a Sharpie marker, just a fine tip Sharpie, like this. I took a fine tip Sharpie and I made a little bit bigger dot over the 1/4 inch line, and because this is an Omnigrid ruler, they actually have little dots in all of them, but I made a dot 1/4 inch in on all 4 of seams. So this is where, if you were to go from dot to dot, that's where my block is actually going to be when it's sewn into the quilt. So I made 4 dots. When I trim the triangles, the half rectangle triangles, you'll see that I'm going to be using this tape and these 4 dots as my markers for trimming. Now, because I'm left-handed, I actually did a ruler for me differently. So any of you who are lefties, then you'll want to just make yours the opposite. So you can see that I did the same thing. I marked 6.5 inches down, and then I came in 3.5 inches from the left side instead of the right, so that I can, with my left hand, so I can trim here and here. I also again made my little dots in the 1/4 inch seam allowance spot on all 4 corners. Now in this, on my ruler, I also, and I'll talk about this later, I also made one for a 2.5 by 4.5 inch ruler. So this is for a half rectangle triangle that will be 3 by 6 inches finished, so 3.5 by 6.5 unfinished. And the ratio here is a 2-to-1 ratio. And so that is what I'm going to do. So let me show you how we're going to trim these blocks. If I start here, and this is a left-facing half rectangle triangle, and you can see where I marked where my dot would be if I just square this up. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to turn this a little bit. I want to make sure that on this point and this point, I want to make sure that my fabric here on these ends go into the tape, like, so that I know I'm leaving fabric for trimming the other direction. So I want to make sure that I've got space down here and here for trimming. Once I'm sure that I do that, then the next step is to look at my little dots that I made, those little 1/4 inch dots, and I'm going to align those so that they sit directly above that seam. And again, I'm making sure that I've got some fabric here and here. If this is a little closer than I want it to be, then all I do is I rotate it down just a little bit. So there we go. So now I know that I've got fabric still waiting under here that can be trimmed. I make sure my dots are aligned there and there. Now, if I was right-handed, at this point I would take my rotary cutter and I would cut here and here. Because I'm left-handed, I'm going to use the ruler the opposite way, but I'll demonstrate to you how I would trim that. So I'm going to take my cutter and I'm going to trim across here. And here. And so you can see that what I trimmed actually is not straight, it's angled. So it looks like it's going to be kind of weird, but I promise it's really going to work. When I take it off, then I look like I just made a really wonky block. but I didn't. Something that is really useful with trimming half rectangle triangles is a rotating cutting mat if you have one. If not, you just pick it up and switch it. So now I'm going to come back, and this time it's even easier, the second cut, because now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this lines up perfectly with the window I've created. I want this corner just right in there. Notice I'm not paying any attention to these dots right now, these seam allowance dots, because they're not on a seam line for the half rectangle triangle. So on the A blocks, I'm just using these two. But once I get that so it's all perfectly aligned, and I double check to make sure that I have 2 dots here, make sure this is aligned here and here. So every time I trim, there's these 4 spots, the fabric here and here, and the 2 dots that I made for my seam allowance. So once I've got that the way I want it to be, then once again, I'm going to simply cut and cut again. And then when I remove my ruler, you will see that I have here a half rectangle triangle that does not have the seams going directly into the corners. In fact, what they should be doing is they should be 1/8 of an inch. You can see I've got that 1/8 of an inch right there. And so now I have a perfectly trimmed A half rectangle triangle, and it is ready to be sewn into the quilt. So again, for right-handed people, I will show you now how I'm going to do one that is a B block. Okay, so here's a B, and you can see that we do trim down quite a bit when we're making them, but that fabric makes it so that we can guarantee that we'll always be able to trim the way we want. So let's do a B. So now that we're going to do a B, I'm going to do the same thing again. I have 4 points that I'm watching for. Okay, every time I use my ruler, I'm going to look for these 4. So the first would be that I have fabric down here into this tape line, and I have fabric here in this tape line, and of course I want to be able to make sure I've got stuff to trim there. Because this is a B block, now I'm going to pay attention to these 2 dots because they are the ones that sit over the seam. So once again, I'm going to align those dots so that they're right above, and then I'm going to trim there. Now, actually, because I'm left-handed, I'm going to make it look harder and rotate it the other way. Sorry, this is because I don't trust myself with a rotary cutter with my right hand. That would not be a good idea. Same way, just oriented the opposite direction, a little bit different for me trying to cut this right-handed way with as a left-handy person. So you can see that either way you tape your ruler would be fine. I just thought it would be easier to know that you can do it differently. We've got our first cut, and you can see again it's a little concerning. It looks super wonky, but we're going to rotate it around, and we're going to do the same thing again that we did before. Once again, I am looking at 4 points on my window here. My first 2 are to make sure this is aligned and this is aligned, and to check that that fabric corner just is sitting right in that corner. And then I'm going to check my dots and make sure that they are over my seam. And once that's the case, I'm going to cut and cut again. You see once more that I have a 1/8 inch seam allowance on both. For right-handed people, that's how you would make your own ruler and perfectly trim half rectangle triangles in this way. It's awesome. This can be used for all kinds of measurements of half rectangle triangles. So now let's talk about how we would do it on the left-handed ruler for people who are left-handed like me. It's the exact same principle, just opposite, just cutting a little bit differently. So if I take my A block, and you can watch this if you're right-handed again, just as a reminder if you want to see another one done, of the 4 points that you're watching for. So here I have my ruler that I marked for easy cutting for a left-handed person. I want to make sure I've got fabric here and here. And then my next step is to take my dot. You can see I'm way off here, but I'm kind of on there. That means that this whole thing needs to be rotated. Again, there's nothing that is going to really feel super normal about trimming this way, where we're trimming it to appear to be super wonky, but it's all about making that angle come into the seam allowance in the right spot. Okay, so now I've got this all aligned. I'm going to trim my first 2 sides. So there's my first cut. Now I'm going to rotate and I'm going to do my second cut. But again, I'm looking for my four points here. I've got the point of my fabric here. I'm going to double check that this it's coming right into the corner of that window that I taped onto my ruler. I'm going to make sure this is aligned here. I'm going to check my dots. They should sit right on top of that seam allowance line. And I am going to trim one more time. A block, half rectangle triangle that I'm trimming. So there we go for the A, and for the B I will do the same thing. I have fabric down here, I have fabric up here, and once I'm sure that I've got that, which means I can trim all four sides safely, I just want my dots to be in the right place. I'm going to rotate it again, look for those same 4 points, alignment on there and in the corner, check my dots, and then once again you can see that now I've been able to trim and I've got my 1/8 inch mark right there. So now with the left-handed taped ruler I've flipped them actually, but I've got my A and my B blocks all ready to go. Now as a final really quick thing, I just want to show you that the same thing can be done with a smaller one, say a 2.5 by 4.5 inch one. This is the size that I use in the 48 inch version of the Serve quilt. Same thing. So in the opposite corner of the very same ruler, I had room. So I taped off from here. I taped off 4.5 inches, came in 2.5 inches in this extra space and just added a second layer of tape, and I did the same thing. I've got my 4 seam allowance dots. To trim these, I would do the exact same thing. Make sure I've got fabric in every, going into the tape line on both, I would align this and then cut and then rotate and do it again. So here is a 2.5 by 4.5 inch half rectangle triangle that I used. So this is an awesome method, and one example here that I would say is that you can see that I have a line on the ruler going through here, but that's not what I'm paying attention to. I'm going to disregard any lines on the rulers and only pay attention to what's happening with my dots. It's an awesome way to be able to make half rectangle triangle blocks without any special ruler or trimming or anything method. You just create your window for the size that you need, mark your seam allowances, and then just always watch carefully as you trim. And so there you go. We have a simple way to make half rectangle triangles, however you may want to make them. They're easy, trimmed perfectly with the 1/8 inch seam allowance on both ends, and it's really not so tricky. Just a few things to pay attention to. And so thanks for watching, and I hope that you have a great time making half rectangle triangles, especially if you're making a Serve quilt. And I look forward to seeing what you make. Thanks, bye!